I am Senator Florence Shapiro, and I am the chair of the Senate Education Committee. And beside me is our friend and chairman of the House Education Committee, Rob Eisler. We are very, very pleased to have senators and House members here. We are very fortunate today to have Dan Pink in our chamber, and certainly we're very fortunate to be able to discuss some of the issues that Dan is so well known for. I also want to say thank you to everybody who's here, who's up in the gallery. We thank you so much for being a part of this. We very much appreciate your interest in this topic and certainly your interest in education. That's why we're all here, is our interest in education, and I think that speaks volumes about how many people are here and how important this is to so many people across the state of Texas. So we've been investigating ways to absolutely ensure that our education system is in sync with the ever-changing global environment and global workplace. I have had, and I'm sure many of you have, read many of the works of Dan Pink. And as the luck would have it, as I mentioned earlier, he is here in Austin, Texas, and we have him with us today, and we are very grateful for that. I only met Dr. Pink this morning, but I can tell you that I have been familiar with his concepts and some of his ideas for a good while. In fact, I read a really stimulating article discussion between he and Thomas Friedman, who of course is the author of The World is Flat, and it's been very enlightening to see the future workforce that Thomas Friedman talks about and the issues that Dr. Pink talks about and how they can meld together. It's not an either or, it's a melding together. But I'd like to start by asking you this question, and it comes out of your book, quite frankly. The question is, in the introduction of your book, you say, the past few decades have belonged to a certain kind of person with a certain kind of mind, but that the keys to the kingdom are changing hands, that the future belongs to a very different kind of person with a very different kind of mind. As you can imagine, that got my attention.
Thank you, Representative Eisler and Senator Shapiro, and thank you for having the foresight to hold a hearing on this. I think we're actually, in many, many ways in this country, at a hinge point in history, and I think it's true for education as well as other aspects of American life. What I'd like to do during just 5 or 10 minutes here at this briefing is make a case to you, make an economic case to you that I think has some implications for the future of education. And I think what we need to do when we think about how we prepare our kids, we need to make sure that we're preparing them for their future rather than our past, for their future rather than our past. And I think there's a big change between, say, the future that I was prepared for and the future that my own kids are going to be prepared for. Let's go back in history a little bit when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I grew up in a middle-class family, middle of America. I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, which, like Austin, has a football team. Middle-class parents dished out the same basic plate of advice to their kids, and it went like this. Get good grades in school, go to college if you could, and then prepare for a profession that's going to give you some amount of economic security. So that typically meant try to become an accountant, maybe try to become an engineer, maybe try to, if you were glib and good at English as I was, maybe try to go to law school. And what was true back then is that if you made it into one of those professions, lawyers, accountants, engineers, you were golden in this country. You had a very solid foothold in the middle class. And even more important, as we think about how to prepare our kids for their future, no matter what profession you were in then, in the final third of the 20th century, it was those sorts of abilities that mattered most, the lawyer, engineer, accountant kind of abilities. Those were the abilities employers wanted. Those were the abilities that individuals were incentivized to develop. And we had this whole apparatus beginning in kindergarten, in elementary school, in middle school, in secondary school, in community colleges, 2-year colleges, 4-year colleges, to try to build a workforce with those abilities. But that yields, I think, a very powerful metaphor, and here's how the metaphor works. It used to be that the abilities that mattered most in any kind of profession were the left brain abilities, the logical, linear, sequential, SAT, spreadsheet abilities. Those are the abilities that employers wanted. Those were the abilities we wanted our kids to develop. And today, this is very, very important to underscore, and it actually echoes a point Senator Shapiro was making earlier. These abilities, these left brain abilities, are absolutely essential. They are indispensable. You must have them. We can't just dispense with them. They are essential. But while they're necessary, they're no longer sufficient. And it's now abilities characteristic of the right hemisphere. This creativity, big picture thinking, those are now in a very hard-headed way the abilities that matter most. Those are the abilities that are going to define our kids' future rather than our past. The scales are tilting. And I want to explain just in a couple of minutes why this is happening. Because the truth of all of this is that I myself happen to be a very, very left-brain guy. I'm very logical, I'm very linear, I'm very sequential, I love numbers, I love charts and graphs. I even went to law school, sort of the epitome of left-brain nerdiness. But if you do what I've done over the last few years and taken a very hard-headed look at the facts, the evidence, the data of what's going on, I don't think it's even close that the scales are tilting. And that for our kids, the left-brain abilities still matter, but they matter relatively less. And it's these right-brain abilities, again, artistry, empathy, inventiveness, that are going to determine their future. There are three reasons this is happening. The three A's: Asia, automation, and abundance. Asia, automation, and abundance. But what part of the brain can software replace? Not the artistic, empathic, inventive side, at least not yet, but the logical, linear, sequential, analytic, spreadsheet, step-by-step side. In some ways, the conversation is misplaced. We think it's all about high-tech, and high-tech certainly matters. But if you look at the abilities that are going to define what our kids do for a living, those abilities are not high-tech so much as they are high-concept and high-touch. They have to be able to do things that are hard to outsource, hard to automate, and that iterate something new. Hard to send overseas, hard to reduce the lines of code in a computer program, and that give the world something it didn't know it was missing. And to my mind, those are the sorts of abilities. I know there are a lot of arts educators out here. Those are the sorts of abilities that I think kids learn in the arts. The National Science Board went out and surveyed engineering employers, people who hire engineers. And here's what the engineering employers told the National Science Board, a pretty left-brain group, what they wanted to hire in engineers. And I'm quoting now. They said, in addition to analytic skills, which are well provided by the current education systems, companies want engineers with passion, lifelong learning skills, systems thinking, an ability to innovate, an ability to work in multicultural environments, an ability to understand the business context of engineering, interdisciplinary skills, leadership skills, communication skills, and an ability to change. This is what people who hire engineers are saying they want. They don't want individuals who are vending machines for right answers. They want people who can think. We give our kids these problems that are single discipline, perfectly defined, and have one right answer. When in fact you go out into the world, as legislators know more than anybody else, and it doesn't come at you as a math problem or a science problem. It comes at you as a big honking problem. All right? And usually the problem is multidisciplinary, usually it's poorly defined, and usually it has multiple possible answers, none of which are perfect.
Let me just clarify, because I think it's a really important point. Obviously, it sounds like what we're doing is one versus the other.
Right.
I think what this is all about is melding the two. It's not one in place of the other. I think it's a matter of melding.
What's interesting is if you look at what's happening in China, which is a much more sprawling, obviously larger, more sprawling, more difficult to manage country. So the Chinese government has established some centers to integrate arts education into the national curriculum. They have actually a few big gleaming facilities to try to, because they say we are not going to have an economic future merely being the routine manufacturer for the rest of the world or the routine provider of services for the world. We need to get our students to think more like artists. And so, China, I wish I could show you the photograph. China has a couple of really big gleaming facilities to try to integrate arts education into their national curriculum. That should be, I think, alarming to those of us here in the U.S.